In 1861, a shipbuilder named Joshua Dewis felled timber near Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia, and used it to build a brigantine called the Amazon. Her first captain, Robert McClellan, fell ill during her early career and died soon after. Over the next several years, the ship ran aground, changed owners, was rebuilt, was re-registered in New York, and was given a new name, Mary Celeste. On December 4, 1872, she was found drifting in the Atlantic with no one aboard. The lifeboat was gone. The crew was gone. The captain, his wife, and their young daughter were gone. But food, water, clothing, and personal belongings remained behind. Mary Celeste became the ghost ship everyone remembers. But she was not the only one connected to Canada's waters, coasts, and Arctic routes. Across the Atlantic, the Great Lakes, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and the far north, ships have been found abandoned, vanished without a wreck, or left behind in ice for decades. Some were solved, some became folklore, and some still have just enough evidence to keep the mystery alive. In this video, we are going to go over 10 of those ships, what was found on board, and what happened to their crews. Before we get into it, though, it helps to understand why Canada keeps showing up in these stories. The country's coastline is the longest of any nation on Earth, at more than 243,000 kilometers. That includes the Atlantic seaboard, battered by North Atlantic storms, and choked with fog and icebergs. It includes the Pacific coast of British Columbia, where channels twist through mountain ranges and weather can change with almost no warning. It includes the Arctic, where pack ice can trap a ship in a matter of hours and hold it for years. And it includes the Great Lakes, which, despite being freshwater, are large enough and deep enough to produce waves that have sunk ships the size of ocean freighters. For as long as people have been sailing these waters, ships have been going into them and not coming back. And every once in a while, the ship comes back without its crew. Mary Celeste was built right here in Nova Scotia. Her story is probably the most well-known maritime mystery of all time. And because she has been covered so extensively elsewhere, we are going to keep this brief. But we are starting with her, because after Mary Celeste, this became the image people had in their heads whenever they heard the words ghost ship. After her rebuild and renaming, Mary Celeste left New York on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy. She was carrying 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol. On board were her captain, Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crewmen, 10 people in total. About a month later, on December 4th, a Nova Scotian brigantine called the Dei Gratia spotted the Mary Celeste drifting under partial sail roughly 400 nautical miles east of the Azores. The Dei Gratia's captain, David Morehouse, happened to be a personal friend of Captain Briggs. When signals went unanswered, Morehouse sent his mate, Oliver DeVoe, to board her. What DeVoe found has haunted people for more than 150 years. The ship was seaworthy. There was about 3.5 feet of water in the hold, but that was not dangerous. 6 months' worth of food and water were still on board. The crew's personal belongings were in place. Clothing, pipes, razors, letters. Everything a sailor would take with him if he were abandoning ship for good was still there. But the ship's single lifeboat was gone. The chronometer was gone. The sextant was gone. The navigation papers and the captain's logbook were gone. 9 of the 1,701 barrels of alcohol were later found empty. The final entry on the ship's logbook slate was dated November 25th, more than a week before the Dei Gratia found her. A Vice Admiralty court inquiry in Gibraltar investigated every theory from mutiny to piracy to insurance fraud. None of them held up. One of the more plausible explanations is that fumes from leaking alcohol barrels, which were made from red oak staves prone to seepage, produced a frightening release of vapor that Captain Briggs mistook for an imminent explosion. He may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a precaution, intending to stay tethered to the ship. If that line broke in heavy weather, the lifeboat and everyone in it would have been lost. No bodies were ever recovered. The Mary Celeste herself was eventually wrecked deliberately off Haiti in 1885 by her last owner in a failed insurance scam. What happened to those 10 people sometime after that final November 25th entry has never been solved, and a monument in the shape of her hull still stands at Spencer's Island today. The strange part is, Canada had another Mary Celeste case only 12 years later, and this one was found with the fire still burning. On August 29, 1884, the Royal Navy gunboat HMS Mallard was patrolling the waters between Baccalieu Island and Catalina, off the northern entrance of Conception Bay, Newfoundland. At some point during the patrol, the crew spotted a brig drifting erratically. She was not holding course. She was not responding to signals. When the Mallard pulled alongside and sent a boarding party, the ship turned out to be the Resolven, a Welsh merchant vessel that had left Harbour Grace just 3 days earlier, bound for Snug Harbor, Labrador, to pick up a load of cod. The problem was not that the ship was destroyed, it was that it looked recently occupied. The galley fire was still burning, the lamps were still lit. Food was sitting on the table, the chronometer was running, and the logbook was open, with its last entry made only about 6 hours before the Mallard arrived. The ship had some damage: a broken yard, a smashed stem, an unshipped rudder, and a damaged jib boom. But none of it was catastrophic. The ship was still floating. She was still serviceable. A large iceberg was visible nearby, and it is possible the ship struck it or came dangerously close. But the lifeboat was gone. All 7 crew members and 4 passengers were gone. 11 people vanished. And yet, sitting in the captain's quarters, untouched, was a small package containing 100 pounds and the captain's gold watch. If someone had committed robbery or violence, they had left behind the most valuable items on the ship. There was no struggle, no blood, no damage consistent with an attack. The leading theory was that an inexperienced crew panicked when ice damaged the ship, launched the lifeboat, and were swamped in the North Atlantic. That was the accepted explanation for more than a century. Then in 2015, a Newfoundland woman named Daisy Bailey contacted a Welsh writer named Will Wayne, who happened to be the great-grandson of the Resolven's captain John James. Bailey told him a family story that had been kept quiet for generations. Her grandfather and his brother had reportedly found near Deer Harbor on Random Island in Trinity Bay the body of a man in a captain's uniform sitting beneath a tree facing the sea. He was wearing a distinctive white gold pocket watch. They never reported the discovery, and according to the family, they came into unexplained money around the same time. It remains unverified, but Wayne published a book about the investigation called The Ghost Ship of Trinity Bay. The full truth of what happened to those 11 people has never been established. The Mary Celeste and the Resolven are what most people think of when they hear the phrase ghost ship. A vessel found adrift, meals on the table, crew vanished. But there is another kind of ghost ship, the kind that does not disappear at all, the kind that keeps appearing long after everyone has written it off. On October 1st, 1931, a steel-hulled cargo steamer called the SS Baychimo was returning from Arctic fur trade routes when she became trapped in pack ice off Alaska's north coast near Point Barrow. The Baychimo was a 230-foot, 1,322-ton vessel, originally built in Sweden in 1914. After World War I, she was handed over to Britain as part of German war reparations, and the Hudson's Bay Company bought her in 1921. For a decade, the Baychimo ran routes between Vancouver and remote Hudson's Bay Company posts along the Arctic coast. Her captain was a man named John Sidney Cornwell. When the ice closed in that October, the Hudson's Bay Company sent aircraft and evacuated 22 of her 37-man crew. Captain Cornwell and 14 men stayed behind in a wooden hut built on the ice, watching the ship from shore, waiting for conditions to change. Then on November 24th, a 3-day blizzard hit. When it finally cleared, Cornwell looked out toward where the Baychimo had been locked in the ice, and she was gone. He assumed the storm had broken her apart. The Hudson's Bay Company agreed. They wrote off the ship and the remaining cargo of fur as a total loss. Cornwell and his men were flown back to Vancouver in February of 1932. But the Baychimo was not gone. Days after the blizzard, an Inupiat seal hunter reported seeing her drifting about 72 kilometers from where she had been trapped. Cornwell's crew tracked her down, boarded her, stripped out the most valuable furs, and then left her for good. The ice, they figured, would finish her off. It didn't. Over the next 38 years, the Baychimo was spotted again and again across the Arctic. In early January of 1932, a prospector named Leslie Melvin saw her while mushing by dog sled from Herschel Island to Nome. In March of 1933, a group of Inupiat hunters boarded her and sheltered inside the ship for 10 days during a storm. Later that same year, the crew of a schooner called the Trader boarded her and salvaged items, including a collection of ethnographic artifacts from the Copper Inuit. Those artifacts are now in the University of Alaska Museum of the North. She was boarded again in 1934, spotted again in September of 1935. In 1939, a captain named Hugh Polson attempted to salvage her entirely. He tied his vessel alongside the Baychimo, but ice and storms drove him off before he could tow her anywhere. And it just kept going. The last confirmed sighting of the SS Baychimo was in 1969. A group of Inuit spotted her in the Beaufort Sea, still afloat, still drifting, 38 years after her crew abandoned her. In 2006, the Alaska Office of History and Archaeology launched a formal effort to find the wreck. As of today, they have found nothing. The Baychimo is presumed to have finally sunk somewhere in the Arctic, but no wreckage has ever been confirmed. From a ship that kept appearing for decades, we go to one that sailed itself 1,200 miles across the Arctic without a single person on board. In 1850, the British Royal Navy purchased a merchant bark called the Ptarmigan and refitted her for Arctic service. She was reinforced with heavy timbers, fitted with an internal heating system, and sent north to search for Sir John Franklin's missing expedition, which we will get to at the end. She was briefly named HMS Refuge, then renamed HMS Resolute. Her captain was Henry Kellett, and she was part of a 5-ship expedition commanded by Sir Edward Belcher. In the winter of 1853, the Resolute and several other ships became trapped in pack ice off Bathurst Island in the Canadian Arctic. Captain Kellett was confident the ship could survive. He believed the summer thaw would free her. But Belcher disagreed and ordered 4 of his 5 ships abandoned in the spring of 1854. Kellett protested but obeyed. Before leaving, he draped his personal armchair with a Union Jack and left it on the deck as a symbol of British ownership. The crews trekked across the ice to Beechey Island and caught transport back to England. Belcher was court-martialed for the decision. He was acquitted, but he was never given another command. For the next 16 months, HMS Resolute drifted, unmanned, unguided. Through Barrow Strait, Lancaster Sound, Baffin Bay, and down Davis Strait, more than 1,200 miles. On September 10, 1855, an American whaler, called the George Henry, under Captain James Buddington, was sailing off Baffin Island when he spotted a ship among ice floes near Cape Walsingham. He signaled. No reply. He sent a boarding party across, led by a seaman named George Tyson. What they found below decks was striking. The ship was snugged down for winter. Hatches were caulked, yards were struck, sails were stowed below. Many personal items and shipboard objects were still in place, giving the impression that the crew had only recently stepped away. Uniforms, books, and personal effects remained untouched. Captain Kellett's armchair was exactly where he had left it, draped with the Union Jack. The port side was thickly encrusted with ice and there was water in the hold, but the hull was sound. The Resolute had drifted 1,200 miles through some of the most dangerous waters on Earth and arrived in serviceable condition. Captain Buddington, short-handed and storm-driven, managed to bring the Resolute all the way to New London, Connecticut, arriving on Christmas Eve, 1855. The British government waived all claims to the ship. The United States Congress then purchased her, had her fully refitted at a cost of $40,000, and presented her back to Queen Victoria in 1856 as a diplomatic gesture. The Resolute served in the Royal Navy until she was broken up in 1879. And this is where it gets interesting. Her Majesty ordered that the oak timbers from the Resolute be fashioned into a desk, which was then presented to President Rutherford B. Hayes in 1880. Many of the most famous photographs of American presidents in the Oval Office show them seated behind that desk, a desk made from the timbers of an Arctic ghost ship. From a ship that drifted for over a year, we go to one that vanished in a single night on the Great Lakes. And this particular disappearance has never been explained. On November 20th, 1902, a steel-hulled bulk freighter called the SS Bannockburn left Fort William, which is now Thunder Bay, Ontario, heading downbound through Lake Superior toward Midland in Georgian Bay. She was loaded with 85,000 bushels of wheat. The Bannockburn was a 245-foot Canadian-registered vessel built in 1893, operated by the Montreal Transportation Company. Her captain was George R. Wood of Port Dalhousie, Ontario. Her crew numbered about 20 men. The oldest was 37, most were between 17 and 20. The youngest, a wheelsman named Arthur Callahan, was just 16 years old. The Bannockburn had a history of bad luck. She had previously sunk in the Welland Canal in October of 1897, and she had run aground near Snake Island Light in April of 1902. After a slight grounding on departure, she resumed her voyage on November 21st. Around noon, Captain James McMaw of the upbound steamer Algonquin identified her through binoculars about 7 miles to the southeast, roughly 80 miles off Keweenaw Point and 40 miles off Isle Royale. McMaw watched her for several minutes, and then she simply vanished from view. He assumed fog had swallowed her. That night, a powerful winter storm raked Lake Superior. At 11 p.m., the pilot house watch aboard the passenger steamer Huronik reported seeing ship lights they believed to be the Bannockburn. No distress signals were observed. The Bannockburn never reached the Sioux Locks. She never arrived anywhere. On November 25th, the steamer Frank Rockefeller passed through a debris field near Stannard Rock Light. The only confirmed wreckage ever recovered was an oar and a single life-saving preserver found months later by the Grand Marais Life-Saving Service lashed together. Some reports say an oar with the inscription Bannockburn, daubed in blood, washed up at Grand Marais, but those accounts have never been well substantiated. On November 30th, 1902, the ship and her crew were declared lost. No wreck has ever been found. No bodies were ever recovered. No explanation was ever confirmed. Some believe she hit the then uncharted Superior Shoal. Others think a boiler explosion sank her. though no charred wreckage was ever found. Whatever happened, it happened fast enough that no distress signal was sent, and completely enough that an entire steel freighter and every person aboard disappeared without leaving a confirmed wreck site. Within a year of her loss, sailors on Lake Superior started calling her the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes. Crews began reporting sightings of the Bannockburn gliding through fog and snow squalls, often just before bad weather. Among the more notable accounts, the crew of an ore freighter called the Walter A. Hutchison, sometime shortly after World War II, claimed the Bannockburn came straight at them out of the fog, forcing an evasive course change that may have saved them from running aground. Whether you believe the ghost stories or not, the disappearance itself is real. The Bannockburn went into Lake Superior with her crew on a cold November night and never came back out. The Great Lakes may seem like an unusual place for a ghost ship, but Lake Superior alone covers more than 82,000 square kilometers, with depths reaching over 400 meters. It has its own weather systems. It generates its own storms. And it has swallowed an estimated 350 ships since Europeans started sailing it. One of those ships was not just the first ghost ship of the Great Lakes, it was the first European sailing vessel to sail the upper Great Lakes at all. And it vanished on its very first return voyage. In the winter of 1678 to 1679, French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, built a ship at Cayuga Creek on the Niagara River. She was roughly 30 to 40 feet long, about 45 tons, armed with 5 to 7 cannons, and she had a Griffon figurehead taken from La Salle's family coat of arms. He named her Le Griffon. On August 7, 1679, Le Griffon launched with a crew of 32, plus Father Louis Hennepin and La Salle himself. They crossed Lake Erie, passed through Lake Huron, and reached an island at the mouth of Green Bay on Lake Michigan. There, La Salle loaded roughly 12,000 pounds of beaver pelts worth somewhere between 50,000 and 60,000 francs. Then La Salle made a decision. He stayed behind with 4 canoes to continue exploring. On September 18, 1679, Le Griffon set sail under her pilot and a crew of 5 or 6 men for the return trip to Niagara. She fired a single parting cannon, and she was never seen again. Local tribes reported seeing the ship sail into a violent storm. The following spring, a hatch cover, ruined pelts, and other debris were reportedly found along the northern Lake Michigan shore. Father Hennepin believed she sank in the storm. La Salle himself was convinced the pilot and crew had scuttled the ship and stolen the furs. Other contemporary accusations blamed rival French fur traders, Jesuits, or an attack by Ottawa or Potawatomi warriors. No theory has ever been substantiated. Le Griffon has been called the Holy Grail of Great Lakes shipwreck hunting. Since the 1800s, there have been at least 22 documented claims of finding her wreck. All but 2 have been definitively dismissed. In recent years, searcher Steve Libbard has claimed that a wreck in northern Lake Michigan could be Le Griffon, but state maritime experts have disputed the identification and no confirmed wreck has been accepted. Ownership disputes between the discoverers, the state of Michigan, the United States federal government, and France, which would technically still own the wreck as French Crown property, have further complicated things. More than 340 years later, Le Griffon remains lost. But Franklin's ships were not the only ghosts left behind by the search for the Northwest Passage. One rescue ship found the passage and then became trapped inside it. In 1850, the British Admiralty purchased a 422-ton merchant ship, reinforced her with teak, English oak, Canadian elm, and steel plating, and sent her into the Arctic from the Pacific side through the Bering Strait to search for Franklin's missing expedition. Her name was HMS Investigator. Her captain was Robert McClure. In 1850, the Investigator entered what is now McClure Strait, and in doing so, confirmed a navigable route through the Northwest Passage on paper. But the ship became locked in pack ice at Mercy Bay on the north coast of Banks Island in September of 1851. She sat there for 3 winters. The 66-man crew was reduced to half rations. 3 men died of scurvy and exhaustion. By the spring of 1853, McClure knew the ship was never getting out on her own. On June 3, 1853, he abandoned her. The crew was rescued by sledge parties from Captain Henry Kellett's HMS Resolute, the same Resolute that would later drift 1,200 miles on her own, and they crossed the ice to Melville Island. Their evacuation marked the first complete traverse of the Northwest Passage, but it was accomplished by men on foot and by sledge, not by a single ship sailing through. After abandonment, the Investigator sat in Mercy Bay for decades. Local Inuit made repeated trips to the ship over the years. Stripping copper and iron, metal nails went missing from smaller boats on the nearby beach. An Inuit account from 1910 reported that one year the ship had still been on the beach, and the next year she was gone without a trace. When Canadian anthropologist Vilhjalmur Stephenson reached Mercy Bay in 1915, he found no remains of the Investigator at all. Some historians have even speculated that Inuit hunting trips to the abandoned ship, which would have concentrated activity in the area, contributed to the local decline of muskoxen on Banks Island. The muskoxen have since rebounded to nearly 50,000. In 2010, a Parks Canada team led by Marc-André Bernier began a sonar search of Mercy Bay and found the wreck within minutes. She was sitting 150 meters off the north shore of Banks Island in just 8 to 11 meters of water, upright in silt. The masts had been scraped off by decades of ice, but the hull and lower decks are exceptionally well preserved. Remotely operated vehicle imagery has captured photographs of muskets, shoes, copper sheathing, rigging blocks, and metal spikes. There are no plans to raise her. She remains in Mercy Bay, one of the most significant and best preserved Arctic shipwrecks in the world. And then, in 2013, Canada accidentally created a modern ghost ship. The MV Lyubov Orlova was a 4,250 tons, 295 feet Soviet ice-strengthened cruise ship built in 1976 at a shipyard in what is now Croatia. She was named after a famous Soviet film star, and she spent decades running Antarctic and Arctic cruises. In September of 2010, she was seized at St. John's Harbor, Newfoundland, after her charterer, a company called Cruise North Expeditions, filed a lawsuit. The ship's owners had canceled a cruise due to mechanical faults, and her 51-member crew had not been paid in 5 months. The crew was put up in a hotel. The ship sat impounded along the St. John's jetty for nearly 2.5 years, deteriorating. She became infested with rats. She was sold for scrap in 2012 for approximately $275,000. The tow did not begin until January 23, 2013, when an American tug called the Charlene Hunt hooked her up and started pulling her toward a scrapyard in the Dominican Republic. Within 24 hours, in winds of 35 kilometers per hour and seas of 3 meters, the tow line snapped. By January 28th, the ship was drifting east off Newfoundland's Avalon Peninsula. A supply vessel called the Atlantic Hawk briefly took her in tow to steer her away from the Hibernia oil platform. Another vessel, the Maersk Challenger, attempted a second tow on February 2nd that broke within minutes. Once the Lyubov Orlova drifted into international waters, Transport Canada cut her loose, citing safety and jurisdiction. The ship was last visually confirmed on February 4, 2013, roughly 250 nautical miles east of St. John's. A Transport Canada aerial photo from March 12th showed what may have been a damaged lifeboat matching the vessel. Then, on February 23rd and March 1st, the ship's registered emergency beacons, which activate on contact with water, transmitted from positions about 700 nautical miles off the coast of Ireland, roughly 1,300 nautical miles from Newfoundland. This suggested the ship had sunk. Aircraft were sent to the coordinates. They found nothing. In early 2014, a Belgian salvage captain named Pim de Roods told the British press that if the ship were still afloat, it would be overrun with rats that had been forced to eat each other. The Daily Star, the Daily Mail, and the Sun ran sensational stories about a ghost ship of cannibal rats possibly drifting toward Britain. A Canadian rock band called Billy Talent even wrote a song about it. Reports of debris on a California beach in 2017 were debunked. The Lyubov Orlova has never been found. She is either sitting on the bottom of the North Atlantic or, if she somehow survived, she is out there right now. From a modern ghost ship to one of the oldest maritime legends in Nova Scotia. This next story is the only one on this list where people still claim to see the ship burning on the water. During the War of 1812, an American privateer schooner called the Young Teazer operated out of ports along the eastern seaboard, raiding British merchant shipping near Halifax and along the coast of Nova Scotia. She was owned by Samuel Adams of New York, armed with several wooden decoy cannons known as Quaker guns, and she carried an alligator figurehead at her bow. Her captain was William Dobson. Her lieutenant was a man named Frederick Johnson, a British deserter. After a successful first cruise, the Young Teazer left Portland on June 3, 1813, and took 2 prizes off Sambro Island Light near Halifax. The Royal Navy responded aggressively. Over the next several weeks, she was chased by HMS Hogue, a 74-gun warship under Captain Thomas Bladen Capel, as well as HMS Orpheus, HMS Wasp, Acasta, and Valiant. On June 26th, the Orpheus drove her into Lunenburg. On June 27th, the Hogue trapped her in Mahone Bay between Mason Island and Refuse Island. There was no way out. As HMS Hogue prepared a 5-boat boarding party that evening, Lieutenant Johnson understood what capture would mean for him personally. As a British deserter, he would be hanged. So rather than face the noose, Johnson ran below decks and threw a flaming torch into the powder magazine. The Young Teazer exploded. Approximately 30 of the roughly 73 men on board were killed instantly. The gutted hull floated briefly, surrounded by bodies, wreckage, the alligator figurehead, and the Quaker guns. 7 crewmen survived, several severely burned. They were taken to Melville Island prison camp in Halifax and later exchanged. The dead were buried in unmarked graves at St. Stephen's Anglican Cemetery in Chester, Nova Scotia. Salvaged timbers from the Young Teazer were later built into a restaurant in Chester called the Rope Loft. A piece of the keel was fashioned into a wooden cross inside St. Stephen's Church. A scorched keel fragment and a cane made from teazer wood are displayed at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic in Halifax. But the story did not end with the explosion. Beginning roughly a year later, residents around Mahone Bay began reporting what became known as the Teazer Light, a burning 3-masted schooner appearing on the water, often near the anniversary of June 27th. Nova Scotian folklorist Helen Creighton documented numerous accounts in her classic work, Blue Nose Ghosts, noting that many sightings seem to occur during full moons and that some could be optical illusions. Reported sightings continued for generations. And the Young Teazer is not the only phantom fire ship in the region. Across the Northumberland Strait between Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick, and up into the Bay of Chaleur between New Brunswick and Quebec's Gaspé Peninsula, residents have been reporting a burning phantom ship since at least 1786. The first documented sighting occurred at Sea Cow Head Lighthouse on Prince Edward Island. where the keeper watched a three-masted schooner under full sail drive toward the cliffs in a northeast gale, then turn into the wind and vanish. Around 1900, a boat crew in Charlottetown Harbor rowed out to rescue what looked like a burning schooner with sailors running on her deck. The ship vanished as they approached. A dive search found no wreck. In November of 1965, a woman near Cape John, Nova Scotia, telephoned neighbors along the shore and they watched a burning ship together before it disappeared. Reported sightings have continued into modern times, though explanations range from atmospheric effects to local legend. Whether you believe any of it or not, the phenomenon has been documented in newspapers, folklore archives, and witness statements for nearly 240 years. And that brings us to the final story. It does not involve a ship found drifting or a ship that burned on the water. It involves two ships sent into the Arctic with 129 men on the most famous polar expedition in history. They vanished. The entire crew died, and the ships themselves sat on the floor of the Canadian Arctic for more than 160 years before anyone found them. What happened between the day they disappeared and the day they were finally located is one of the most disturbing stories in all of maritime history. In May of 1845, two ships left England under the command of Sir John Franklin. The ships were HMS Erebus, 378 tons, and HMS Terror, 331 tons. Both were originally bomb vessels. Terror was a veteran of the War of 1812 and had participated in the bombardment of Fort McHenry. For the Arctic expedition, both ships were heavily refitted with iron bow sheathing and former railway locomotive steam engines driving single-screw propellers. They carried 129 officers and men in total. Franklin commanded the expedition from Erebus. Captain Francis Crozier commanded Terror. They were attempting to navigate the Northwest Passage. The expedition was last seen by European whalers in Baffin Bay in the summer of 1845. After that, nothing. No messages, no signals, no contact of any kind. The ships, the crews, the expedition, all of it vanished into the Arctic. What happened took years to piece together. The ships became icebound in Victoria Strait near King William Island in 1846. They sat trapped in the ice for 2 winters. By the spring of 1848, Franklin himself and at least 23 others had died. On April 22, 1848, the surviving crew abandoned both ships under Captain Crozier's command and set out on foot for the Back River, also known as the Great Fish River, hoping to reach a Hudson's Bay Company outpost or indigenous settlement. None of them survived. The only direct written evidence of the disaster was a single note found in a cairn on King William Island in 1859 by Captain Francis Leopold McClintock. It confirmed that Franklin had died on June 11, 1847, and that the ships had been abandoned. But the fullest account of what happened to the surviving crew came not from European explorers, but from Inuit oral testimony. Explorer John Ray brought the first of these accounts south in 1854. Inuit witnesses described men who were starving, suffering from scurvy, and possibly affected by lead exposure and disease. And they described evidence of cannibalism. The reports were controversial in Victorian England, but modern forensic analysis of human remains found on King William Island has supported them. Several Inuit accounts also mentioned seeing at least one of the ships later, either briefly manned or drifting unmanned, well south of the original abandonment site. For more than 160 years, neither ship could be found. Dozens of expeditions searched. All of them failed. Then, on September 7, 2014, a Parks Canada-led expedition located HMS Erebus in Wilmot and Crampton Bay, east of Queen Maud Gulf, in just 11 meters of water. The wreck was roughly 80 kilometers south of where the ships had been abandoned, meaning the ship had moved a considerable distance after the crew left, either sailed or carried by ice and current. The discovery was confirmed by Prime Minister Stephen Harper in the House of Commons on October 1, 2014. The wreck preserves remarkable detail, including deck planking, copper bilge pumps, and 2 cannons. 2 years later, on September 12, 2016, the Arctic Research Foundation located HMS Terror in Terror Bay, off the southwest coast of King William Island in 21 to 24 meters of water. The critical tip came from an Inuk ranger named Sammy Kogvik, who had seen what looked like a mast jutting from the ice 7 years earlier. When divers reached the wreck, they found it in what was described as pristine condition. The anchor cables were stowed inboard along the bulwarks, indicating that Terror had not been anchored when she sank. That detail has raised the possibility that someone may have been aboard after the official abandonment, though the exact sequence of events is still debated. A 2018 remotely operated vehicle survey of Terror found Captain Crozier's cabin sealed by sediment, but otherwise the best preserved space on the lower deck. Archaeologists believe that written records, possibly including journals or orders, may still survive inside. Over 350 artifacts have been recovered from Erebus alone. Under a 2019 agreement between the United Kingdom and Canada, the wrecks and future finds belong jointly to Canada and the Inuit Heritage Trust. Inuit guardians from Gjoa Haven now monitor both protected sites. What makes the Erebus and Terror different from the other ships in this video is that the mystery did not end when they were found. In many ways, it deepened. The wrecks are in positions that do not entirely match the last known records. Terror appears to have been deliberately placed, not simply abandoned. Crozier's cabin may still contain documents that could rewrite the final chapter of the expedition. And the 129 men who sailed into the Arctic in 1845 left behind enough evidence to confirm that their final months were desperate, prolonged, and marked by suffering that is difficult to hear without imagining yourself there. The Mary Celeste's crew vanished in 1872 and has never been found. The Resolven's 11 people disappeared off Newfoundland in 1884. The Bannockburn went into Lake Superior with her crew and left behind a single oar. The Griffon has been missing since 1679. The Baychimo drifted the Arctic for 38 years, and the Erebus and Terror sat on the floor of the Canadian Arctic for more than 160 years before anyone found them. In most of these cases, the water gave back just enough evidence to keep the question alive. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching.